Hello and welcome into DAV Podcast, episode number 18 today. It's 20 Years of Remembrance, taking a look back at September 11th, 2001, a day that will live on forever in America's hearts and one that impacted many veterans in our communities in many ways. And that's why we're digging into it here on the latest edition of our DAV Podcast. I'm Dan Klaskins, along with my co-host, Marine veteran Ashley Burns. Ashley, 9/11, not any of us listening or that was around at that time will ever forget that day. And I know with so many of veterans out there, especially, that were impacted by it, both the ones at the in service at the time and ones that ultimately had to propel them into service. And with everything going on in the world today and this anniversary looming, what a better time to look back and never forget.
Right. Yeah. Like you said, for so many Americans, the terrorist attacks on 9/11 are sort of forever etched on the soul. And that's so true for our service members and veterans. It was just a defining time in their lives, and that's myself included. It completely changed the trajectory of my own life. But there's so many stories of heroism in the days and the weeks that followed those events. They're emotional, they're gripping, and they are an important piece of our American history. And today we're going to share the story of Gerard and John Shapira, brothers whose story of family service and sacrifice is, I think, just one of the truest and most pure forms of patriotism that I've heard in quite some time. So here is Mary Deaver with that story.
Hi, I'm Mary with DAV, and I'm here today talking to Gerard Shapira from New York City. Grew up in Staten Island, and we want to tell the story of his brother, John. His brother was a Marine and a New York City firefighter, as well as a New York City police officer. And it's very important that we tell his story and we honor him and those like him who have given their lives for our country. So Gerard, can you tell me a little bit? John joined the Marine Corps. You were his little brother. What led to that? What led to him joining?
Well, it's funny. John started out always looking at like a John Wayne character in his world as a young man. So he was a Boy Scout to start. So that's, I think, what started his life of service, rising to the rank of Eagle. And then he said, what better thing than to be John Wayne and join the Marine Corps? So in 1980, I was just going into high school. He joined the Marine Corps.
One of his first duty stations was in Beirut, and he was there in October of 1983. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes. So he was at the time with I guess they called him the 23rd or 24th MAL, Marine Amphibious Unit. He was a communications operator, and he was assigned to the airport in Beirut on their peacekeeping force. It was an early morning, and he was on the shift, so radio operators didn't get to sleep in at all. So he was on his way to his post when the truck bomb exploded. So he was out of the barracks. Otherwise, he would have been in the barracks and possibly would have perished. So it's a funny little connection that the person he stopped to talk to on the way to his post continued to the barracks and passed away. And John continued on to his post and did his job. And for a long time after that, it took me a long time to get to this, but he always thought that if he talked to that guy for one more minute, maybe he would have changed his future. And it always sat tough with John, but at the same time, it made him more personable to people, because if he was going to have a conversation with you, he took the time to spend with you and understand who you were.
So what was it like for your family? I mean, this was 1983, didn't have communication. You knew where he was. You didn't know if he was okay or not. What happened, and how long did it take before you were finally able to hear from him?
It came actually kind of a weird roundabout how we found out. There was no communications. There were no cell phones. There was nothing like that. But what happened is our congressman at the time was Guy Molinari, and he was from Staten Island and Brooklyn. He was a congressman in the United States Congress, and he was a former Marine. So when they knew, it's right after it, the Congress put together a group of, liaisons to go over and just see what happened, put some faces to the names. And he realized that he had a Staten Islander who was among the missing. So he seeked him out and took a photo. The minute they were together, he had his photo people shoot the picture which I still have. And he called my mother. So I remember being in our kitchen and him saying, "This is Guy Molinari, your congressman from Washington. I'm in Beirut right now, and I have your son here, and he is safe." Oh, wow. So it was a very, very dramatic moment. And my whole family wasn't here. I just happened to be there when my mother got the call. So it was very personal that we realized after 3 days of being lost, he was alive again.
How do you think being a part of that experience affected your brother?
Oh, it affected his world tremendously. I think, like I said, his contact with people changed. His contact with the world changed. He realized that we're only here for a short period of time. So make every moment count, because you never know when the ultimate end is going to come. So live life as if it's super precious, which we know it is. But sometimes we get lost there and we don't realize how precious it is, and we don't take the moment to spend with somebody or do something nice or kind. His world changed dramatically in the Marine Corps, and then when he came out, his life of service continued, and I think that's the reason his life of service continued, to see if he could affect people every day. And I think that's where he grew into a new normal after experiencing such a horrible disaster.
He comes back and he decides that he's going to continue by becoming a New York City police officer.
When he got back, he joined the New York City Police Department and spent some time in our old neighborhood back in Brooklyn. And he was in the neighborhood policing unit, so they would go and introduce themselves to the local people and, what problems you having on this block. So he single-handedly cleared all the drug dealers off of one block because it was affecting the neighborhood so adversely. And when the police department realized that, they immediately put him in the narcotics unit, and he became a detective. Again, what's he doing? He's back in his old neighborhood trying to make people's lives better. Once he was through with the narcotics, he became a regular, city, detective wearing a suit and all those things. And he did that for 12 years until one day he decided, I guess, that the police department was too dangerous. And he told me, it's too dangerous for me. I'm going to come over to the fire department and be a fireman. Because in the interim of those 12 years, I had graduated from college and went to become a firefighter. So I was a firefighter ahead of him, and he must have seen the impact I was able to do and have on people's lives. So he decided to change his career path after 12 years with NYPD and become a firefighter.
About what year was this when he decided to come over to the fire department?
He came over in 1997. No, yeah, 1997. Okay,
so tell me a little bit about his firefighter career.
So he was assigned as a probie to Brooklyn, and they called his firehouse, crazy as it sounds, West Point, because it was all where the best of the best went. When I heard he had got assigned to Engine 219 at Ladder 105 in Brooklyn, I was elated because I knew it was a great place, and he would be very successful there with his personality and his persona. So that's and at the time I had worked probably 3 miles away in another firehouse in Brooklyn, so it was common knowledge and easily for us to get together. And we worked actually 2 shifts together, which was priceless. One, I worked in his firehouse, and one, he worked in my firehouse. So for 2 brothers to work together on the same shift and do the same job, it was so rewarding for me personally.
September 11th, 2001. Tell me about that day.
So his day started with doing an extra shift to get off, because he was 6 weeks from being married. So he was working. We were allowed to do that. You go in for an extra day, and then they give you a day off later on. So he was going in for an extra shift, and he knew that his company, he was assigned to the Engine 219, but the ladder company, Ladder 105, was short. So he knew, like everybody, they want to do the less commuting, less travel. So he knew when he got to his firehouse, he wasn't going to have to travel to another firehouse to work. So he knew he could stay home. And so that's exactly what happened. September 11th, he signs the book. He's in the Engine. They transfer him over to the ladder company. And now he's there for the first impact of the first plane hitting the World Trade Center. They were then assigned. The Engine company wasn't assigned right away, but the ladder company was assigned. And they were heading into Manhattan via the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. That was their normal response because they were in downtown Brooklyn, so they got there that way all the time. And they were originally assigned for the Marriott Hotel. And that's the last report we had heard of where they were. John also, in the interim, worked as a mover for a moving company in the World Trade Center. So he would move tenants in and out. So I think he had an inherent connection to the buildings. And then secondarily, my sister Nancy was working for the Port Authority in the World Trade Center.
She got out, correct? She got out in time?
Yes. Okay. So Nancy, crazy as it sounds, she was also in the World Trade Center for the bombing in 93. Mm-hmm. So she was there too. So I know John was thinking about my sisters in those buildings. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm going to go help. Again, he's just thinking very selflessly. His fiance did work 5 blocks away too. So getting into downtown Manhattan was going to he was securing his loved ones. I know his goal was to get there and to help and secure that if he could help his loved ones be safe, then he would.
What happened after?
So it was a chaotic day. It was a little chaotic for me personally because now I'm home with my 2 beautiful children, my 2 daughters, 9 months and 18 months. And I remember him, I'm thinking I had to go. I have to go. I have to get to work. I have to get to work. Every fireman has to be there. And my babysitter, who was my next door neighbor, was like my mom at the time, just drove away. I didn't know why she was leaving, but she was going shopping. It was another day. And she didn't come back for hours. So I was kind of a prisoner in my own house, but I could hear John saying, take care of your family. You know, I didn't even know he was working at this point. I knew that I was trying to get in touch with him, but, you know, no cell phone. So we were just trying. And it took about 3 hours for me to realize that he wasn't home and he was working. And then the realization came that now the towers are collapsed, and my heart sunk because I knew a lot of my fellow firefighters, police officers, and thousands of civilians were killed. You had that feeling as being a firefighter. I just knew that we had lost an uncountable number of people, as well as firefighters and police officers.
So you said you didn't even know he was at work. Did you have a gut feeling or anything that day?
I did. I knew his life of service. If he was going to be there. He was going to do everything he possibly could. And I thought it was kind of weird that I didn't get a call from him saying, hey, come on, we're going. We got to go as brothers. It was none of that. So that's when I really had a bad sinking feeling that he was going or he was there already.
What happened after that? How long did you have to wait to get any sort of answer?
So as the enormity of the disaster unfolded, I was in work, finally got back to my house and my firehouse. And it was probably about 2 or 3 in the morning when the shift had come in from digging, because I was on the lieutenant's list. So they said to me, you got it. You're now the acting lieutenant of your firehouse. Being a man of, duty and, you just do what you're told. So I stayed and I did my job. One of my senior men had come in and he had said, your brother was in ladder 105 for the day and they haven't heard from them. And this is it about 3 in the morning. And he said, you should just go home. And I'm like, no, I have to go. He goes, we've been there all day. There's no one to find, and it was a tremendous gut-wrenching feeling for me. So I headed home and my sister had escaped. She was home. My wife was in Midtown Manhattan. She had come home. John's fiancée, Gina, she got out of Manhattan. And so we all kind of made our way to my home. And my sister, Eileen, and my sister, Susan, had come the next day. So we were all here to try to make heads or tails of that, figure it out. And it took until the spring of 2002 where we had finally made a recovery. We ended up having a memorial service in November of 2001. And then when we did finally make the recovery, we did get a recovery. It was only 2 bone fragments, part of his hip and part of his calf. And we buried those.
Did you ever hear any firsthand accounts from anybody that was with him that day?
A lot of the stories we heard were that they were making their way through the Marriott Hotel into the South Tower. They were actually seen in the South Tower lobby, making their way up the building. So the nature of the losses and doing some research, you found out that the higher the people were, sometimes they were recovered more. the lower they were, there was less recoveries. To this day, there's still probably half of the firefighters and half of the civilians have never been recovered.
2 terrorist attacks in one lifetime is extraordinarily terrible. How do you think John's legacy, John's life, has kept influencing in a positive way the people that knew him? You mentioned his bigger-than-life personality and his whole persona. How do you think that has carried over the years?
I say if you say somebody's name over again and you say it every day, then they never really die. So that's kind of an interesting element that we've come to. But we have done a golf outing for John as a memorial, just something to do, for 18 years. Every single year, we put 120 to 140 people on the golf course and think about John for the day. And then we've created a foundation in his memory, the John G. Chapora Foundation, very simple. And it does supports the Boy Scouts. Anybody who goes on to Eagle Scout gets a scholarship who solicits us. And it's just really the one-time scholarship for books, basically your first year of college. We support a veterans camp up in Maine. We support the OED, Explosive Ordnance Group. So we also support local children. There's a young Boy Scout who has a skin disorder. So every year he gets medical needs and we help them. So we're not changing the world, but we might just change one life. And that's a very simple thing that John would do. So that's kind of our mantra. We can't change the world, but we can help you right now and change the way your life is and just make you smile for 1 minute. That'll work. That's a change, and that's a good change.
What would you say to anybody who has lost somebody, who is missing somebody, or is really just struggling with any sort of mental health problem or isolation?
I think one of the biggest things I could do and think about is every day you make a choice to get up and go outside in the world and go have some contact with somebody. Some of the days I get up there are really bad days, and we're talking 18 years later that I don't miss him. And I find myself pushing to get outside and be with somebody. Any kind of contact is better than being alone. And every one of us has the ability to be very introverted and be alone, but it's very difficult and very, very hard and very courageous to pass through that step and to get out there and just be with somebody. And it might just be as simple as going to the store and having an interaction with somebody for a cup of coffee. Or, you know what? If you like pets, go volunteer at the pet center, the local pet shelter, because now you're going to have contact with a pet and a person. So it's just a matter of getting past your own inability to do something and go do it. It's a driving force. I think most of our military people have that feeling that they're here to do something, driving, right? What do? We move forward all the time. They're always saying move forward. Fire department, same way. We don't stop until the fire's out, so we continue to move forward. So moving forward is a direction, and everybody needs a direction. So move forward in that direction. Even one step today is a forward direction.
How do you think that John's ability to handle these extraordinary circumstances, how has that affected you and by extension kind of rippled out into your community?
Well, his larger-than-life personality, when he passed, it was a very challenging time because I knew I was lost as a person, as a firefighter. And coincidentally, the photo of the 3 firefighters raising the flag, much like the Iwo Jima flag, I knew all 3 of those people. 2 of them I put in my best friend category. I heard the story before it hit the papers, and it was pivotal for me because I knew that they were doing it because they knew John. They were lifelong friends, and that flag went up for John. And I'm thinking, wow, that's amazing. So that day cinched it for me that I had a purpose to continue on serving people, and with John's memory of service in there, and that's why the foundation was brought to bear, that we could go ahead with this and actually make a difference in people's lives. So it was a real simple decision, but a very challenging one because I knew that it was very difficult to take those steps. And my wife, who was a driving force at the time, said, what do you do when you're out on the ship and there's a storm? You point the ship into the storm and you keep going. And sooner or later, the sky turns blue and you're out and you did it. You succeeded. So that's every day. Sometimes I have those challenges, but every day you succeed. You try to push through that storm and get out the other side. So one night we're at the World Trade Center site, and I realized that I had to be there. I had to be there a lot because I knew the window of opportunity to be there and to help and try to recover as many people as we could, not just John, but as many people as we could. And I spent a lot of night times down there digging. So one night I look up and there's this huge banner that is across the like 10 windows in a building, and it says "Never Forget." And I look up and I tell my friend who's volunteering with me too, I said, "Wow, that's so crazy." I said, "That doesn't make sense to me." He's like, "Well, why not? We're never going to forget these people. We have to constantly be reminded." I said, "Well, constantly reminded, that means somebody's going to forget one day." And I said, "Unfortunately, I'm the person who lost a loved one. I have to always remember that person." So it's not about never forgetting for me. It's about always remembering, because it's always going to be there. His loss is always going to be there. So it kind of put a positive spin on a negative thing, and that's our mantra in the foundation, is to always remember. It shows up on all our shirts and our logos and anything we put on. It's usually somewhere where we can tell people always remembering is a critical part of our success, that we have to remember things that have happened, even tragic as they are.
What would you say today if John was right here with you?
Well, I'm in my kitchen where he would have come through the door I'm looking at with probably a sandwich for lunch. And that's just how he was. He just thought selflessly of people. So I think about that moment, looking at my door and saying he's going to come through that door one day. Knowing he's not makes me just know he's in my heart still. Mm-hmm. And that helps. And then I mention his name and it helps.
How's everyone else in the family?
There are some issues. My sister Nancy has PTSD. So knowing full well she survived 2 terrorist attacks and John survived 1, only to perish on the second one, there's a lot of guilt there that goes with it. Maybe even survivor guilt that she's working through. And we know that PTSD is something you don't choose to have. Mm-hmm. But sadly enough, you have to live with it. And when she has her good days, they're awesome. And when she has her bad days, they're really bad. She perseveres, and she's very like John, very much like John. She wants to continue moving forward. She has a bad day, but she knows a bad day. And tomorrow will be better, she says. So, and his twin sister is still connected to him through death. She still says she has these feelings of moments, And my older sister, Eileen, is become very spiritual. And I think that's probably an element of this. She's very involved in her church and spiritual groups and helping people. So again, everybody has their connection to John. Even Nancy, I know her drive is because of her connection to John. She doesn't want to have PTSD, but it's who she is, and she's managing it, and she's moving forward with it. And I give her a lot of credit, because that's a very tough thing to do. And all of us have it. I think anybody who serves has some semblance or idea of PTSD, shell shock, whatever they called it then. We all carry those burdens with us, but we just have to find a way to keep going.
Well, thank you also for your service as a New York City firefighter. You are a captain. How many years now have you been active?
I just passed my 29th anniversary.
Wow. You're going to do 29 more?
I would think that's a good theory. But I know my goal was to do a whole career. In New York City, we're allowed to retire after 20 years. So I wanted to do a whole career. It took me a little while to get this, but I wanted to do a whole career post 9/11. A 30-year career in the New York City Fire Department would be a great accomplishment.
Big shoes to follow, but sounds like John was an extraordinary person to have known and to have loved and to have touched this world in a way that a lot of people do not. So thank you for sharing his story. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
I know I'm always emotional, but you can't not be emotional about that person. And you lost. And even though the loss is a long time ago, it still conjures up all those memories and emotions. And sometimes you really have to embrace the emotions. You can't always stifle them and push them away. And John, the one thing I found after he had come back from Beirut, he was much more affectionate to people and would stop and say, "I love you" more. And I don't know if that's because of the loss that he had and realized how precious life was, that he had to move forward and do that, but I think that's important for people, that if you know somebody or you love somebody, it's okay to say I love you. It's not a bad word. It's a good thing for people to hear, and it makes people happy.
I appreciate you keeping his memory alive.
Thanks very much. I appreciate your time too.
A very touching story indeed, and one that just shows you the depths of how many lives were really impacted on the day of September 11th. And next up here, we're going to hear another story. This one comes from DAV National Service Officer John Caruza, an Army veteran himself. John was just 18 years old when he watched the events of 9/11 unfold while sitting in a high school classroom. His father serving at the time was certainly something on his mind, and ultimately, a lot of these things would lead him to want to enlist himself. Our Matt Sainstink sat down with John and got more of his story and how it changed him forever.
Hi, I'm Matt Saintsing, Assistant National Communications Director for Disabled American Veterans in Washington, D.C., and I'm here with National Service Officer John Caruza, who is the Assistant Supervisor for the DAV office on Montgomery, Alabama, and we're here to talk about September 11th. We are just on the doorstep of the 20th anniversary of 9/11, but before I get into that, John, you are an Iraq and an Afghanistan Army veteran. And we're recording this at a time when the Afghan government had just collapsed, and the images coming out of Kabul and the airport specifically are just heartbreaking. They're gut-wrenching. So I kind of wanted to ask you, how have you been doing these past few days?
I've been doing pretty okay. Lots of mixed emotion, which I'm sure everyone's feeling. Even people who haven't been, I'm sure they have a lot of mixed emotion involving that as well. So.
No, yeah, absolutely. I was an Army veteran as well, and I deployed to Iraq twice. I did not go to Afghanistan, but when I see, a lot of my friends went to Afghanistan, almost all my friends went to Afghanistan, and I just see what they're going through. And so I kind of wanted to ask that. You mentioned the emotions. Do you have mixed emotions about this?
We've had 4 administrations to figure out how to do this withdrawal. And with everything happening, you can't help but feel a little disappointed in everything that's happening. We have lessons learned from the Iraq withdrawal that we learned. And so, of course, there's some level of disappointment and concern about could we have done better, especially sure. When you have a lot of friends who were killed in Afghanistan. You kind of have a higher hope. Maybe that's reasonable, maybe that's not, but that's just one of the many emotions that me and a lot of group of friends are feeling and questions we're asking. The second thing is, we saw the videos of people, getting stuck in the wheel well of a C-17 trying to escape. That's horrifying. The third thing that always comes up too is the pride. So right now, they spun up the 82nd Airborne Division's GRF, Global Response Force, and they spun up the Marines Response Force as well. And those boys are already on the ground getting at it. Yeah. So you can't help but to be proud that to the last moment, we're out there defending those people and defending our ideals.
These two countries, the wars in these two countries really characterized the American military for the past 20 years, especially after September 11th, 2001. How old were you on 9/11? What were you doing? And what do you remember about that day?
I had turned 18 a week before. I was sitting in class, an announcement came on for all classrooms, turn on a TV. We're watching the second plane go into the Trade Center. I watched that live on TV. It was infuriating because I grew up in the military. My dad was in the Army, in the infantry at that for 20 years. Oh, wow. So he was looking at retiring at that point as well. And so, it's no secret that there's a lot of countries out there that hate us. So I wasn't as surprised, but I was taken back by the damage and the target selection. Yeah. It was exactly what you expect from a terrorist attack: maximize impact, maximize effect, take out something that's symbolic of America. And then on top of that, just the mass casualties in that tiny little condensed area. It was shocking.
And you're absolutely right. They hit the New York City World Trade Center, almost like a seat of our economic power, and also the Pentagon, seat of our military power. Were you say you were angry? Were you confused? What were you feeling that day?
As arrogant as this might sound, because as Americans, when we go across the world, we realize sometimes our pride oversteps itself. But my thought was, how dare someone do that?
So I think it's interesting. You said your dad was in the infantry for 20 years, looking at retiring around this time. So I think you told me before, you never expected to join the Army, and then that day kind of set you on a different trajectory. You were ready to go to college, right?
Yeah, so I just taken the SAT and I scored like a 1526 out of 1600.
Wow.
There was a private college that was going to take me, and I didn't think once about the military because I saw what type of wear and tear it does on a family, and the lifestyle it was, always being busy, always being gone, because my dad was in the infantry. So I was like, you know what? I'm not even going to do that. I wasn't even going to go get a degree and get a commission.
Yeah.
Which is what my dad said. If you do that, that's what you probably should do, would be smarter. But after September 11th, random Army recruiter came up, asked, you ever thought about joining the Army? And just out of nowhere, I was like, yeah. He's like, well, let's get you to take the ASVAB to see how high you score and what jobs you can pick. And I said, oh, I already know I'll score high enough to get what job I want.
Yeah.
He's like, what's that? And I was like, infantry, airborne option, station of choice. And he's like, oh, you got a daddy that's in, huh? That's the first thing he said. And I was like, yeah, I do. And he's like, where's your station of choice? And I was like, Fort Bragg. And he's like, well, Fort Bragg's filling up pretty quick these days, which is the truth.
Sure,
Everywhere was filling up.
Yeah.
And I said, well, then Vicenza, Italy. And he said, well, Italy's harder to get than Bragg. And I said, well, you better put one on a piece of paper. I'm not signing jack. And he took me down, and literally within 24 hours, I had signed an infantry contract.
How long were you in the Army before you deployed to Iraq in 2003?
I went through basic training. I went through AIT and airborne school, which when you add it all together is about 5 months.
Yeah.
And then I showed up to Rear D on the 82nd. I showed up to the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, which is 3rd Brigade 82nd. They had already deployed in August of 03 to do a follow-up for the OIF-1. Their area of responsibility was Fallujah.
Okay.
And so I showed up to that unit, and I showed up to the 82nd in September. And by Thanksgiving, I had met my platoon in Iraq.
So you went to Iraq before you went to Afghanistan. Did you have any feelings that you wanted to be in Afghanistan and not Iraq, or did you just want to be with your unit?
I mean, honestly, I just wanted to be wherever. Again, going back to the angry high schooler, angry about September 11th, I just wanted to be wherever I could be, being a grunt, and getting rid of the bad guys.
Yeah.
Or protecting some of those people in Iraq and Afghanistan, because, I mean, it was pretty horrifying, the things that the Taliban did to them there, just because they didn't follow suit to what the Taliban believed.
But you also served in Afghanistan twice, once with the 82nd and once with the 173rd Airborne Brigade?
Correct.
Okay. So you actually made it to Vicenza, Italy, just like you wanted.
I did. And I actually ended up. So my first year in the 82nd, I'd already deployed twice, because I came back from Fallujah, Iraq in April of 04, which everyone probably remembers Fallujah more for the Marines and the Black Hawk contractors that got hung from the building. Not the building, the bridge.
The Blackwater contractors, yeah.
Yeah. That was right after we left.
Wow.
Right after we left. And so we were driving to Kuwait and saw it on the news.
Wow.
To get our vehicle shipped back to Bragg. And then 5 months after that, we went to Afghanistan, Kunar province, the ABAD area. My battalion did. We did a JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command deployment for the elections in September of 2004. So we were working with a lot of special forces teams. Securing the elections, doing raids on locations that would prevent the enemy from being able to maneuver onto those election polls and stuff like that. Ironically, when I got to the 173rd, went back to Kunar province again, same area, had not changed in about 4 years.
I wanted to ask you about the fighting, and you were in the battalion with Sal Junta, who's a Medal of Honor recipient. From what I understand, there are 2 other Medal of Honor recipients from your battalion, as well as, I'm just going to run through some of the awards here. 2 nominees for the Distinguished Service Cross. One was awarded at the time of this article was published, I'm reading here. 25 silver stars, which you can only get for valor. There's no such thing as a meritorious silver star, right? 90 bronze star medals with a valor award, and over 300 Army Commendation medals with a valor award. You are one of those 300 Army Commendation medals with a V device, as they say. Would you mind telling me, how did you earn that?
We did part of counterinsurgency operations, which is what's conducted primarily in Afghanistan, especially when you're talking about tribal areas where you have one village that's a mile down the road from another and they don't even know who each other are. You have to treat each section individually. You have to hold shores or meetings with the local leaders. I was on my battalion commander's PSD, personal security detachment.
Okay.
And he did meetings with local leaders himself. He was not a guy who sat back and let the fight happen and he was hanging out in the talk. He was, which is the Tactical Operations Center. He built something called a TAC, which is something that hadn't been seen for a long time. And it was a paratrooper concept, which is a Tactical Action Center, which means we're moving, we're in the middle of the fight, coordinating the fight, and doing real-time information, right? And so a lot of times when we did major operations, we were engaged too, or in situations like this, where it was one knot, right? We were doing a shore at one knot and the enemy had set up an ambush when we left. And so when we left, our convoy came under a near ambush, which was kind of surprising because doctrinally near ambushes are where the enemy engages you from about 25 meters or less hand grenade range, right?
Wow.
And so they attacked our vehicles and us from that closer range. 3 IEDs somehow missed the vehicles miraculously, like it bent the front and back bumper of my vehicle. I was acting as a gunner at the time because me and the other people would take turns driving, gunning, etc. because we were all experienced NCOs, part of his PSD, the battalion commander security detail. And they were actually trying to kill him specifically.
Yeah.
And so I got the V device because it was decided or viewed by the leadership that I had deterred or routed that near ambush completely. Now, if you ask me, I mean, everyone there did a fantastic job and all the gunners ended up getting an RCOM V as well. So I want to make it very clear that it wasn't just me doing a lot of cool stuff that day.
I mean, it was just engaging the enemy at super close range. That is,
that's what it was. Specifically, the award says for routing a complex enemy near ambush.
I think that definitely sets the stage for the intense fighting that you experienced and that was raging there for probably years, right? You know,
actually, so my first time there, because it was Asadabad was the furthest north anyone had been in 2004, and it was a bunch of special forces guys. And anyone who's been deployed, and especially combat arms, knows that a lot of the intel reports say they're not going to attack the long hairs, right? Long hairs being special forces guys, dudes with beards, right?
Yep.
They tend not to mess with them. So when we were operating in Asadabad then, a lot of the enemy knew don't mess with those guys because they have assets that's just going to rain down on you. And it's not something you want to do. Right. You don't play with those guys. So when I went back the second time, we had expanded past that. We were on the Pesh River Valley, which also opened up into the mouth of the Korengal, right? Which the movie Restrepo, the documentary, was actually done about my battalion in the 173rd then.
Yeah.
And everything was so much more different because something as small as guys walking around with beards and different equipment changed the enemy's perception of whether they could attack 10 of those guys or 40 of us that were regular army. So it seemed like they were a little more froggy and more likely to get at it. But I mean, at the end of the day, we had, I think, out of that article, like 1,100 contacts were made, 1,100 plus firefights, 5,400 fire missions, firing over 36,000 artillery rounds. I mean, it was getting at it every day.
You're there for a year?
15 months, actually.
15 months. Okay, so it's just under 100 rounds a day. If my doing, I've learned a long time ago not to do math in public, but I think it's just, I think my math is right here, just under 100 rounds every single day.
Yeah, and we had over 3,800 artillery deliveries from rotary wing or fixed wing aircraft. So, I mean, it was something you would see out of Vietnam, and not just the Korengal too, but you can look up the Battle for One Knot, which happened after my ambush, where an American platoon set up there. And I want to say 47 paratroopers is how many were there. I might be incorrect, but they ended up fighting over 300 enemy trying to come down on them.
Jeez, outnumbered, but not outgunned. Yeah.
No, and I was part of the initial boots on the ground once things had cleared up, people could show up. And I mean, it looked like something out of a horror movie. There were buildings on fire. There were literally giant red blobs everywhere. I mean, it's what you would see out of it was out of Apocalypse Now. It was a scene out of that. It was crazy.
Yeah. Wow. And so you were in the Army for 12 years. Were you expecting to do a full 20? Were you a lifer, as they say?
I was. I was actually figuring out what I was going to do until retirement when I got medically discharged.
And you were medically discharged in 2015. Do you want to go into detail about that?
When there was a major training event at Bragg in 2011, our brigade was out there training for 30 straight days in August of 2011. We had a whole lot of heat cats. As a matter of fact, it was on the news that 7 soldiers died on Fort Bragg the first week of that month. I was one of many who suffered a heat casualty, a heat stroke, actually, what they found out years later for most of us. And so a result of having a heat stroke and being a heat casualty, depending on how bad it is chronic kidney disease. So my kidneys weren't working the way they were supposed to. I was having a lot of medical issues with that, tolerance with the heat. So unfortunately, they had to let me go.
Something I know from the veterans I know who were discharged before they had planned to, either because of an injury in combat or in training or any of the ways that our bodies can get breaking down in the Army specifically, right? And I kind of want to ask, a lot of people when they think it's the last job they'll ever have when they're in the military. They love it. They're a lifer, and then they leave the military and they kind of feel a little lost or not really sure what to do. Did you have that experience?
Oh, yeah, I did. So when I was looking at around the time I got discharged, I was looking at moving over to SOCOM somewhere where I had a bunch of friends, looking at going to one of the selection programs for that.
Yeah.
Or I was looking at going to the Army's PA school, physician assistant program, which I had already done a residency and the prereqs for. I was just about to submit my packet. And so when I got out, I was like, what am I going to do? Like, obviously, being a war fighter or a trigger puller or a shooter or whatever phrase you want to use from infantry pop culture isn't a thing anymore. And that was entirely why I joined the Army.
Right.
So I started going to PA school, kind of found college really difficult to a certain degree because as I got further into it, I was like, man, maybe I could get a degree in clinical social work instead. And I could sit down with vets and be like, look, man, I've drank myself under the table. I've had the nightmares. I've had a lot of the issues you're dealing with. Let's talk about what's bothering you today. So I was looking at doing that. And then there was a job opportunity with the DAV, which I kind of felt like was the best of both worlds because I can sit down, talk to vets, relate to them every day, while at the same time getting them in touch with resources they need, whether it be state, local, VA, federal, and help get them better quality lives, help get them back on track because getting out, it was like wandering in the dark.
Yeah, no, it is absolutely invaluable to have someone in DAV with your experience when they talk to a veteran who is maybe a little skeptical or is disillusioned or just does not know where to start to get VA benefits. It can be a bureaucratic nightmare, even for someone who knows the system inside and out. So having an advocate like you in their corner and you know the lingo, you don't have to spell out all the acronyms. You know, someone tells you about a hard day they had downrange, you know exactly how they're feeling. And I just think having that experience is invaluable. So, you know, it's awesome that you're definitely in our ranks. And I'm sure, you know, veterans are definitely appreciate everything you do for them every day. As we approach the anniversary of 9/11, and especially with the recent fall of Afghanistan, what do you reflect back on that particular days of that event? How do you think about that day now?
I look back and we've made headway. We showed the Taliban and then later ISIS who was in charge. We let them know we're not someone to be trifled with, and we're not a country you really need to be messing around with. So I look back on that day with a lot of pride because America came together. And let's be honest, there's a lot of turmoil in our country over a variety of topics right now. I look back on that day and remember our country was united in purpose. We didn't have to institute a draft. There were tons of able-bodied men and now women that they opened it up to combat arms that raised their right hand and said, you know what, I'm going to go overseas and I'm going to do this. I'm going to handle business. I'm going to show these guys what's what. So I look back and there's a lot of pride, a whole lot of pride.
Awesome. Well, that's great to hear. What do you want other veterans or even just regular Americans to know about the global war on terror?
I really hate quoting Black Hawk Down, but it's something we always end up doing in the infantry.
It's a great movie. Great movie.
At the end, when Hoot is asked, the Delta operator, why do you do it? We're not Vietnam vets, and I'm not knocking on Vietnam vets when I say this, because again, we weren't told to go over there. Vietnam vets were drafted. We went over there and we did it again and again and again. And the biggest reason why we did it was for our country and for the person to the left and the right. And I really hope that America one day can learn what we learned in the infantry was it doesn't matter if I like you or dislike you. You and I are in a platoon, we're in a squad, we're in a fire team. And guess what? We're going to figure out how to get along. We're going to figure out how to watch each other's backs. And we're still going to figure out how to respect each other, even if you have a completely different opinion about things than I do. And I really hope with the large amount of vets we got from GWAT going into our country that have learned that lesson, that hopefully a lot of this turmoil will die down and we can kind of figure out how to move forward just together as a country.
And you're absolutely right. Like, I didn't care who you voted for. I did not care who you called God or if you prayed to a God. I didn't care, if you liked fried chicken or if you were a vegan, right? None of that matters. And I think having that experience come back here, and we're also recording this at a time where there is a whole lot of division in this country. So I think that is something that this younger generation of veterans can absolutely teach us all. And we're coming up on our last few minutes of time, and I kind of wanted to end on a positive note. So what do you remember fondest? What is your fondest memories from being in the Army?
That's a three-pronged answer. So I mean, the first thing is the brotherhood. And again, I'm not trying to discriminate against men and women. My time in the Army was surrounded by men.
You're being honest with the reality of your lived experience. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. So the brotherhood that existed, and I'm sure when I go back to Fort Bragg for All American Week, the brotherhood has expanded to accommodate all of the sisters and the additional brethren that have joined. And I miss that. I miss it because at the end of the day, you and I could come back from deployment, and if you were like, "Hey, man, we need to go handle something," I'd be like, "I'm right with you."
Yeah.
I miss that. I miss the camaraderie. I miss the silly games we played with each other because you could do things to each other when you're in a brotherhood that most people would want to fight over. But to you, it's just fun. You know each other in a way that no one else ever could. The second thing I reflect on is the outstanding leadership. I've had really good leaders, too many to name, but I do want to name a couple, like Colonel Oslin, who was our battalion commander with the 2nd of 503rd, still an outstanding leader. When Afghanistan started going sideways, he posted a lot, reached out to us. He even 13 years ago, he was still reaching out to us, making sure we were good. Yeah. Good leadership. Sergeant Lacratiglia, Staff Sergeant Lacratiglia, who's now retired, is a first sergeant, my first squad leader. Good leadership, who at the end of the day, they don't care how many questions you ask. they want you to be a sponge and absorb information, and they want to help you as long as you have the motivation and the will to do it. So I'm never going to forget the leadership. I look back on that very fondly. And the third thing I look back on, coming back from those deployments and knowing you made a difference, at least for that short time frame. When we left Kunar, both times, we had done a job. We had built mills on the second deployment with the 173rd mills. So these local towns wouldn't have to sell their grain to Pakistan so it could get milled and then buy it back for 4 times what they sold it for just to get wheat that they could bake with. Like doing things like that, giving candy to those kids, letting them know that there's a better way out there. It's very rewarding. And I mean, I hope they're all safe moving forward with everything going on in the country.
Absolutely. That they are, the people in Afghanistan are in our thoughts and prayers, particularly, especially the ones who we worked with, and hope we can bring as many back as want to come, is how I personally feel about it. John, thank you for sharing your story. I think this is going to be eye-opening for a lot of people, and thank you for being with me. Airborne all the way.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And, Dan, for veterans like John and so many of our national service officers, those events of 9/11, they not only led them to join the military, led them to service in Afghanistan, but they also led them to a life of service beyond the military by coming to DAV and being able to serve their fellow veterans. So it's important that we remember the sacrifices that they've made, the contributions that they've made. And with the anniversary of 9/11 and the unfolding of events in Afghanistan, we understand that many veterans may be in need of serious mental health support. As a veteran of the war in Afghanistan myself, I understand and I know it is an incredibly emotional time. There's a lot of complex feelings there, and that's okay. You're not alone in experiencing that. And I want to emphasize the resources that are out there. The Veterans Crisis Line, chief among them, for those who need immediate assistance. Call, chat, or text 24/7, completely confidential. You can call at 1-800-273-8255. Chat at veteranscrisisline.net or text at 838-255. Also, be aware of the vet centers in your local area. That's another great resource for veterans to access if they're in need of mental health services and support. And be aware that VA offers emergency mental health care services too, regardless of your service connection with the VA. And DAV also has thousands of service officers standing by to help direct veterans to available mental health resources. Many of them are Afghanistan veterans themselves. So keep that in mind, and you can visit benefitsquestions.org to help locate some of those service officers. But just really bear that in mind. Be aware of what's out there. Check in with your fellow veterans, and just continue doing those buddy checks to make sure that people have access to the help that they need.
Absolutely. Well said. And of course, DAV.org. That's where you can go anytime for any of our programs and services. If you're a veteran in need of jobs or want to help us help veterans, you can also volunteer to drive them to doctor's appointments, so much more. All of our services available for you there. And as far as our podcast, we've got a lot of good episodes that we've already put in the book. So you can go to dav.org/podcast to check out more of those. And of course, subscribe wherever you listen, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify as well. Ashley, good stuff here today. Look forward to catching up soon. And any final thoughts on your reflections of 9/11?
I definitely have thought a lot about it in the past few weeks, kind of leading up to the withdrawal of troops. I think the important thing to take away is that while the situation is so massive and that it was a lot of not great choices to make, it was a very difficult situation on all fronts. I think as veterans, we all need to bear in mind that our contributions mattered, no matter how events unfolded. I think it's difficult for people to watch this and to feel like so much of what really defined their service is sort of unknown and uncertain right now. But the win here is really in those individual contributions, those people that we were able to help, and the service that we were able to provide while we were there on the ground. So I think all of our Afghanistan veterans out there, I can't tell you enough how much I understand, and that really, truly, you're not alone. Please understand DAV is a community of support that's there for you. There's so many other Afghanistan veterans and veterans from other conflicts that are there to help support you in this community. So please feel free to use us as a resource in your own local community. We're happy to have you and to help you in any way we can.
Thank you, Ashley. And for Ashley Burns and all of us here at DAV, I'm Dan Klaskins. We'll see you next time right here on the DAV Podcast.